You're listening to the Get FireSmart Podcast. Here, we learn from FireSmart leaders to discover how we can increase the wildfire resilience of our homes, neighborhoods, and communities. It's time to Get FireSmart.
Well, Kara, welcome to the Get FireSmart Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
This is exciting. We get to do an in-person recording, which is always preferred.
Yeah.
And it's exciting to also have you from Nova Scotia.
Yeah. It was an interesting flight over, but for me coming from Nova Scotia to learn about the program here in BC is crucial to take back home and grow our own program. So
amazing. So for our conversation today, we're going to go a bit into your background and your passions,
yes.
And really what drive you, and then we can also learn a little bit about the presentation you gave yesterday for our listeners. So maybe let's just start with a quick background on yourself. You're from Nova Scotia, which is exciting. But give us a quick overview on your career and kind of what led you to where you are today.
I can blame my father for this because I started volunteer firefighting when I was 14. It wasn't 2 years later that a large fire happened outside the airport in Halifax. And they ended up hiring some summer students for the fire crew. And Dad's like, you should go do it. It'd be fun for you to try. I'm like, no, they don't want to hire a girl, right? So, but the rest is history. I literally ended up on fire crew for 11 years. I ended up going to college and getting my forestry degree and becoming a forest ranger. And then about 13 years ago, I got into the wildfire prevention program. And I've been the provincial wildfire prevention and mitigation officer for the province. And as of 2.5 weeks ago, I decided to switch careers, and I'm now working for Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency as their Wildfire Mitigation Program Manager.
Wow. Quite the journey. You kind of hit every aspect of emergency preparedness and wildfire and forestry. So it's kind of blended all into a perfect blend of what FireSmart is.
I think the biggest thing with my role is I've gotten to wear many hats. So I've been in search and rescue, volunteer firefighter, paid firefighter, and then forestry. So I think all that helps me understand what all of the different groups and agencies out there are facing when they come to wildfire issues. So
awesome. And that's what I got from your presentation too, is just the diversity of the work that you had, be it forestry, be it emergency response, be it structural, be it whatever it is. You can bring that perspective to say, hey, here's what this group needs. Here's how we can help. Yeah. And that pulls into your expertise.
And that's why I ended up taking fire investigation and public information officer, and I'm a fire behaviour analyst, kind of all the aspects of wildfire, because I feel you need to know that in order to understand your position and be able to explain it to public and the residents, and it can be hard sometimes. So
you made a funny, I'll call it a joke, I think it was a funny statement. You said that when you were speaking yesterday, you looked at the crowd, and there's about 700-800 people here at the conference. Maybe not all were at your keynote, but there was a big group, and you kind of said, this group that's here is almost larger than our group back home in our entire response crew. So,
I mean, when it comes to forest rangers and fire crew, it's pretty small. Basically what was in that room. Where I'm at now with Halifax Regional Municipality, they have kind of 50-50 volunteer paid firefighters, and they have almost 1,000. Yeah. So it's a lot more people involved in the fire, but not the biggest experience and training that they could have. So that's where I'm trying to build the program. Yeah.
Amazing. Just kind of closing the loop on Halifax or Nova Scotia, really, for our listeners that maybe are BC, Alberta. What's the landscape difference between Nova Scotia and maybe what we see in BC? Is it similar? Is it different? Maybe explain that a little bit, and we can transition to your...
It's definitely different. Looking at the fuel typing, if you're into fire behavior, we basically have all the fire behavior fuels in Nova Scotia on one given fire. So we don't have large, vast expanses of softwoods and things like that, like you guys have here. Like I was taking a drive through Prince George the other day, and it was like pure softwood trees and popple and cottonwoods, whatever, right? And in Nova Scotia, it's a mix of everything. But when it comes to the topography, it's flatter. We're not dealing with mountainous terrain and winds coming up valleys and things like that. So it's pretty different. And then we're dealing with, as folks in Vancouver and Victoria would know, coastal conditions, with tides and changes in winds and things like that. So
awesome. Well, let's bring it back to your presentation yesterday, which was awesome. And we'll link to some of that in our podcast show notes. But take our listeners through like what was presented, what was your key messaging, what were you hoping to communicate to our audience in your presentation?
I guess the biggest thing was going over the wildfires from last season. It was unique to Nova Scotia for us to have 2 large campaign fires where we had 239 homes burn. And in that, the conditions we were faced with, the lack of snow in the spring, the lack of precipitation in general, the huge winds, the drought conditions, and then just the time of year when the fire happened was big for us. And we don't usually get pyro CB clouds with a lot of our fires because they're so small and they're usually one-day wonders. But I guess the biggest thing on top of that is that one of the communities that was impacted in the wildfire had taken initiatives to do FireSmart back in 2017, as many communities had, back probably after the 2016 fires we had a busy season. And it ended up, like most people, they just kind of put it on a shelf and forgot about it, and they didn't take the time to fully explore the priorities and put a plan in place. And they learned that lesson this year. We were going to have a public information session on June 2nd, and the fire happened on May 28th.
Wow.
So it was hard for them. And then now the community is kind of sitting and healing before they start opening up the doors again to getting more education. So
You mentioned 2 big fire events, and your presentation highlighted the severity of it, and the speed of it. What were some of the big lessons that you took away, your team took away from a FireSmart perspective of what did we learn? Like what would a message that you would take from that experience, be it so fresh, to different communities that may, a big theme we heard about the last couple of days is it's not if, it's when.
I guess the biggest thing is that when we have these wildfire risk assessments, it's not just the responsibility of the government or one specific agency. It's the responsibility of residents. It's responsibility of planners, developers, landscapers. Oftentimes, everybody says, well, the government should have done more to help me save my home, in a wildfire. And I always question them and say, well, what would you do if a hurricane or a flood or a large snowstorm came to Nova Scotia? Would you rely on the government to prepare your home for those events? And they're like, well, no. And I'm like, well, why wouldn't you prepare for a wildfire? It's also a natural disaster. So the biggest thing for the communities is to get out there and start learning. So I've been really pushing the FireSmart 101, the ambassador level of the FireSmart training to communities and trying to get them more involved in taking ownership of what they do around their properties and being more proactive with wildfire mitigation.
Amazing. Yeah, I think I love the way you phrase that. You look at hurricanes or different challenging situations, it's just shifting that mindset of what can I do as a homeowner, as a resident?
Yeah. There's
something that I could do in that situation.
Yeah, and there's so many simple things that people don't even think of, like just mowing your grass and cleaning your gutters. But the other big thing is in the towns and cities that are out there, really listening to the experts, the subject matter experts on wildfire, because I've had some towns that have decided, they call it back home the growing not mowing program, because they want to promote pollinators in the grass and in their yards, in the spring. But what they don't realize is it creates a whole bunch of other issues, with insects, wildlife, and fire, and forest health and things like that. So yeah, there's different ways to approach it. And a lot of these communities in Nova Scotia have, like I said yesterday in my presentation, have covenants in place where they can't actually do any mitigation because they're not allowed to cut trees on their property, or their home has to look a certain way, when it comes to being in the community. It has to have cedar shake, or it has to have a certain type of roofing, just to kind of fit in, with what they have.
So you highlighted a big lesson learned is the education piece and just meeting people where they're at and starting the FireSmart journey. Looking back at the past fire season, was there any success stories, any stories that kind of pulled away from, that difficult summer of, wow, FireSmart works, or elements that you want to take away that, be it success, be it stories of impact?
Yeah, we had several homes within the communities that burned that actually survived the wildfire. And I don't know if they had inherently done FireSmart or if they had attended one of my sessions or had done practices on their own. But they had, simple things like no landscape plants around their foundation. They had rock gardens, rock around their foundation. They had that 15 centimeter clearance, that you need. Well manicured lawns and low amount of conifers and spacing to the forest. And then when you look at the structure, they had minor damage, but then around them on the 3 houses that I know of, all 4 sides, the homes around them burned. So I like to think that it's doing something, that they had done some work that was proactive with wildfire mitigation.
It's always amazing it's hard to hear those stories, but also when you see those stories of homes left standing, homes that had invested in some FireSmart activities and principles to say, no, it's not just text in the textbook. Here's a real world situation of a house that remained standing because of, not minimal investment, good investment, but an investment that paid off in spades.
And it kind of works backwards too. We have a community, a First Nation community. They were the first one deemed FireSmart in Nova Scotia, Bear River. And we had done FireSmart initiatives around like their major structures in their community. And it was like that May, we were dealing with a fire in the middle of the western region of Nova Scotia. And I got a call from one of my friends who worked for EMO. And he said, "Did you hear?" And I said, "Hear what?" And he said, "The band council building burned to the ground in Bear River." And I was like, "Oh no." And he said, "But the good news is because you did FireSmart around the structure, it didn't catch the woods on fire." So it was it was a good thing, but for the community, they're now, I'm going to say discouraged, because they had that event and they haven't done any more initiatives since then. But
yeah, and I think kind of goes to the second point, which we spoke about before we start recording is, FireSmart's not just a one activity. You check a box, it's done. It's really a program. Every season things grow, vegetation builds up, change happens. So, maybe speak to the importance of how FireSmart evolves and it's constant and it's a practice that a lot of families, communities should introduce seasonally, monthly, a part of their vocabulary as they talk to their communities and neighbors. So maybe speak to that as your thoughts on FireSmart not being just like hey, you check this box, you've done it. I've FireSmarted everything. How it's more of a program that evolves and should be building on itself.
I really think, and this is what I've followed for our new strategy for Halifax Regional Fire, is that if residents and communities and groups follow these 7 disciplines, they'll have it well covered. The development, the cross-training and interagency cooperation, vegetation management, education, legislation, and then emergency preparedness and planning. And that was one thing our fire chief really wanted to add to our strategy was the planning component of that emergency planning, the response component of the emergency planning, because we often don't think of that stuff until the end. But for residents, just the simple getting out there and talking to your neighbors and talking to the fire service and working together to kind of get that message through to everybody. And if somebody out there has a way to reach the youth, let me know.
Yeah.
Because we haven't quite got there yet. But, maybe there was a gentleman yesterday said his 5-year-old likes to make FireSmart videos. I'm like, yes, that's what we need to do.
Yeah.
Like get the kids to do TikToks and Snapchats and put them on, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think on community engagement, some of your work and past experiences engaging with media and being that kind of liaison with the community, education's a big piece. I think a lot of people want to invest but they don't know where to start.
Yeah.
It's kind of overwhelming. Do I have to totally change the roofing on my house? Do I have to look at, I'm in a subdivision, do I have to talk to all my neighbors? So it's pretty overwhelming to be like, where do I start? What's the importance that you see, be it in your work with across Nova Scotia, Halifax, like the importance of just community engagement and just connecting with kind of your audience, and maybe just speak to your experience in that or advice you'd have to others, because you do a lot of that type of work.
Community engagement is the number one thing that you should be doing other than communications. With the community engagement, it's talking on their level, and understanding the community itself. So when I do my risk assessments, I do a lot of homework before I even go out there. I want to know what are the businesses that are within your community? Where are your cultural significant areas that we want to protect? What are your issues that you're facing within your community now that you feel should be addressed on an emergency planning level? So I try to look at all that stuff, and I find I get more buy-in from the community if I kind of bring it down to getting their advice and getting them more involved in the program itself.
Any tips on, just for people listening that are like, okay, I want to start doing some engagement outreach, like how do you practically do that? Any quick tips or advice of, you said meeting people where they're at, maybe it's the approach, any quick wins?
I always, like I said earlier, I start with the training. The FireSmart 101 is quick and easy. They can get that 45-minute training in and understand how fire works. The other thing, and I know BC has one, and I created one for Nova Scotia. It's kind of a roadmap of the process and what you go through. So for Halifax County, where I work, we have a program set up where residents can sign up for individual home assessments and get their home assessed for wildfire risk. With getting involved in the community stuff, if you're a part of an association or a friends of group of the community or a wilderness area, getting involved with those groups to become more active in kind of the planning of communities and what they do there.
Going back to this past summer, have you felt in your community work, like has the tone changed across the community? You guys just experienced a pretty significant wildfire event. I'm sure there's people that are in the city that maybe never thought about the threat of wildfire. Has there been a tone that's changed across the community? I mean, I was probably always there and was consistently valued, but have you noticed any changes like post that summer to people now saying, hey, there's increased interest, or there's more dialogue across the community where people are, sharing ideas and learnings?
There was initially, until the flood happened in July. So we had the wildfire May 28th, or May 26th to 28th was the main dates. And then I think Nova Scotians prayed too hard because it's been raining since last June.
Yeah.
So it started raining, and then we had the major flood in July. And then we hit hurricane season. And then we hit snow. We call it Snowmageddon. It was like Cape Breton got pounded with snow. So it's almost like residents are in the moment reacting to that natural disaster, but they don't have time to really focus heavily on anything beyond that. It's just that. I was scared that the tone would be that FireSmart or mitigation work does not work. Because we lost 151 homes in Tantallon and 68 in Barrington, that folks wouldn't say, nah, this isn't worth it. But it was the polar opposite. I had residents calling me that lost their home in the fire, and they said, Kara, we want to do it right this time. We want to build fire resistive. Wow. And even the community groups are coming back and saying, we want to make our community more fire resistive. We want to do this, we want to do that. So it's been very positive, and I find, and maybe it's just because we're such a small province, they all want to work together and they want to help each other out, and collectively Nova Scotians come together to do all the work and help each other.
What does that do for you? Like when you hear those stories of someone that's just lost their home and they're now calling you and saying, I want to do it right. Like, talk to me a little bit about how you experienced that conversation.
It's a mix, because for me at first I'm sad that they lost their home and apologetic that they had to go through what they went through. But on the other end, I'm like, yes, you really want to do it and get it right this time. And a lot of the communities have taken that approach, and it kind of boosts my morale to keep moving with the program, because it can be difficult, when you don't have the buy-in from a group of folks, or if somebody doesn't agree with the program, or I live in downtown Halifax, we'll never have our city impacted. It kind of proves to them that there was a kind of an era. I was like, yeah, I was right, because I had predicted that community was extreme risk before the fire happened, and when it happened, I was devastated because I didn't want that community to be impacted. But on the other hand, I was getting phone calls from scientists across Canada saying, how did you determine that little red circle at the top of that hill to be extreme? And I said, easy, FireSmart. I followed the FireSmart principles, and that's how I determined that. So.
Wow. I mean, to build off of that, like, we're seeing more intensity, more frequent fires. How do you see the FireSmart program evolving to meet the needs of probably a more dynamic fire season?
I guess the biggest one for where I'm at now is that getting involved in the planning and development of communities and implementing FireSmart and emergency response stuff before the community is even built. And so we are hiring a planner to work with me, and that person's going to go out with contractors and developers and kind of provide that FireSmart approach to them being developed, but also with landscape, practices and getting the landscapers more involved in that program.
Awesome. That's a good perspective too. It's now you're integrating into the planning, long-term perspective. FireSmart's becoming a key part of everyone's vocabulary.
Yeah.
We're seeing that.
And even a researcher, I find on the East Coast, a lot of the research is heavy Western Canada. And I really want to build our capacity to have research, within our own province. So we're also looking at hiring an Indigenous researcher that's going to help us with incorporating cultural practices and into our planning, and maybe even looking at finally prescribed fire, because we don't do prescribed fire on provincial lands in Nova Scotia. So.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of this too, is what I really enjoyed from your presentation, which is, a bit of the vulnerability. Here's what happened. Here's what we saw. Here's the realities of what we faced. Here's what we're doing. I think that's kind of a theme of this conference. There's a lot of openness and just sharing ideas, because I think when you're facing such a challenge, which is fire, you kind of have to be collaborative. So I guess, switching into a bit of more of a personal reflection piece for yourself, how does it feel for you as someone that's dedicated most of their career to emergency response and to fire, to come to a conference like this, to connect with so many individuals that are so passionate and dedicated? Maybe bring our listeners in a little bit to the feelings that you have coming here, and whether you're encouraged, whether you're motivated, all the above. Talk to us a little bit about what you're feeling traveling from kind of Halifax to here.
All of the above, really. When I look back to last season and how busy it was and where I was in the program, because I was the lead wildfire investigator for the two fires, and I also did some public media stuff. But there was days that I almost decided to quit. It was hard. And then in the middle of that wildfire, I lost my father-in-law. He passed away. So I was dealing with personal family issues on top of that. But then I got into this new role, and now I'm motivated again to get that growing in Halifax County. And the program, or the BC, has always been seen to us, at least on the East Coast, as the leaders, in wildfire in general. And for me to get the opportunity and the experience to come out here and learn from your province it's fantastic. And the amount of folks I've met this past week, like-minded, different cultures, has been fantastic for me, because Nova Scotia is very similar. We have a big diversity in folks that live there. So getting to see the different perspectives from Indigenous to what other groups are there is great.
Awesome. And you mentioned this a little bit in your answer there, but what motivates you personally in the work that you do? Because you mentioned it. It's long days, it's challenging, it's difficult, it's dynamic. What motivates you personally?
The residents and their feedback. I just, when I go to a session and I do a presentation and I get that feedback from the audience that they really enjoyed it, and then a week later I get a phone call from them again saying, we're still talking about you and talking about your presentation, and we want to move forward. Stuff like that keeps me going. And it's hard because I wore so many first responder hats that I don't have a lot of time to do all my hobbies and stuff. And I love gardening and doing photography, right? So I haven't had a lot of time to do that. But sometimes I just try to incorporate it into, especially photography, into my role, and take pictures while I'm out there. And then I post stuff on social media so the communities feel like, what we did together is important, and they want to, they want to promote it more, really, because they feel like they're involved more. Yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of people, our listeners, resonate with everything you said. There's a common practice across everyone in wildfire, at least that I've seen, is there's a crazy amount of passion, strong work ethic, and that sense of community, and it's this collectiveness of, hey, we're all working together to create a more resilient province.
I'm kind of an optimist, so I kind of shut down the negative. When people bring up stuff, I try to spin it around. You know, they're like, nobody wants to hear the words cutting a tree. You know, most communities, they're like, yeah, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
But when you talk to them about it in a different perspective, like all hazards, you know, removing that tree or by your property, that can cause a wildfire issue. It can also cause a wind issue in a hurricane, you know, heavy snow load or ice. So I try to look at it that way with them, and they're like, that's a good point. You know, maybe I should be doing this for multiple reasons, not just for fire.
As an optimist, I'll ask you kind of a couple closing questions, but if someone's listening and they're wanting to start their wildfire mitigation journey, whether it be a FireSmart journey, and they're looking to start, what would be your advice to them, and your encouraging kind of instructions to say, here's how I would start, here's what I look at. It's a big journey. So as an optimist, what would be your coaching words you'd use?
It is a big journey, and I guess for the folks that are out there that just don't know where to start, look at your property and look at what is close to your foundation within that 1.5 meter, that immediate zone. And if you don't know where to find the resources, you know, number one, visit firesmartcanada.ca and jump on board there. And there's a ton of resources and videos. But second is to contact your local natural resources office in Nova Scotia and get the district staff more involved. You know, get the volunteer fire department, work with them, do cross training and things like that. There's so much, or so many times I've had residents come to me and say, this is a little overwhelming. You know, they find it too much. So I created that roadmap like BC has, just to kind of lead them down the right path, but to also get them to think about it more. You know, what fire can do to your property.
Awesome. Yeah, it's about starting. I think forward momentum is one of those things. Once you start and you begin and you get encouraged, where small steps can make a big difference. Yeah,
just don't get bogged down by the negativity. That's the biggest thing. Like, you know, don't get discouraged because you have so much in your property to do. And if you can't do it, look to your neighbors. They want to work with you. So if you're, you know, not able physically to do any kind of mitigation, you know, get your family involved, get your neighbors involved, and collectively as a group, it's going to be more effective anyway.
Awesome. Any stories at all you want to share, or any last comments that you'd like to pass along to our audience as we start to wrap up in regards to maybe your experience, advice? You've got a mic, you've got a passion. Share a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, for the communities that are out there now that have done work, the biggest thing I have found the most effective is that they're doing demonstration homes. You know, they're having a property done up as FireSmart, or a park, or somewhere where you can go and walk. Like Parks Canada has a park within Halifax municipality that they've done FireSmart work on. And whenever you see a FireSmart event or a booth or anything at like an exhibition, go talk to the folks that are there and get more involved in the program, because we're just starting. You know, it's not a matter of when, it's if. It's going to happen. We said it would never happen in Nova Scotia, and look at what happened last season.
That's a great way to end. I mean, you're an optimist, we can end on a positive note, but it's a good point. If you're thinking it's not going to happen to us, if you're thinking it's not going to happen to our community, I mean, your past summer is a great example of that. It can come, and it might come, and you want to be doing the steps now, and there's an urgency to that as well.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time, for coming on the show. Your presentation was awesome. We'll link to a lot of that
Thanks so much
in our conversation. And hopefully you can take a lot of these lessons and learnings and community back to Nova Scotia and your team there.
100%. Yeah, I'm going to take it back and grow the program. And I've already made connections with a lot of folks here that I'm going to touch base with when I get back. And they're going to provide me with some stuff that you have here in BC that we don't have in Nova Scotia, so I can get it going, like the plant tag program, and maybe even home partners down the road. So,
and that's the beautiful thing about FireSmart. It's taking what's working, sharing it.
yep.
It's a community-based initiative, and the nice thing too, it's fact-based as well. Like the beautiful thing about FireSmart, it's like proven that it works. There's a science component. When you go back to your community and say, hey, it's not just try this. It's like, hey, this saved homes in BC or this saved homes in Halifax. It works. Let's do it.
Yeah. We're all in it together, so we need to work together.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
All right. Thank you for having me.